Today, we have a special guest, somebody that I've known for a really, really long time, who was also very much involved in my business back in the day when I was rehabbing houses. So we have talked quite a bit about different investment strategies over different calls, including short-term buy, rehab, resell, or buy, rehab, rent. Oftentimes, those conversations drift into financing. You guys have heard me multiple times say money's never the problem, right? Find the opportunity and you'll find the money. Our guest today is Ian Cohen, and he was one of the first individuals that I started doing business with when I went from really just flipping a house or two here or there on the side of my sales business, but actually shifted over to really being focused on scaling it at a high level. Ian and I met over a beer at an Irish pub in West Hartford, or I don't know if that's technically Hartford or West Hartford.
It was right on the Hartford, West Hartford line in Hartford. Yeah.
Right on
Which
the.
is no longer there, by the way.
I know, which is sad. That was
I
a cool
know.
spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
That led to, I have no idea, but Ian financed a lot of transactions for me over the years. And in that process, I learned a ton from Ian. Sometimes you guys have asked questions around like, how do you figure out where to get the money, or why do you work with one person other than the other? My answer to that has always been terms and ease. The thing that I've always said about Ian, so I'm going to blow up his ego a little bit here. The thing that I loved about Ian is he was by far the easiest person for me to do business with back then. He knew what he was doing. He made the process simple. He showed up when he said he was going to show up. He did what he said he was going to do. Right. I had other people who would sometimes fund deals that would make it very difficult, in which case it became annoying. It slowed me down, and then I became less likely to use them. Right. So I'm going to introduce Ian Cohen. So that's what I know about Ian. And as always, I like to really give us an opportunity to get to know and understand the guest. Like, who are they outside of their business? How did they end up doing what it is that they do now? So Ian, I'm going to let you kind of jump in and just share, A, who are you outside of what you do for a living? B, how did you end up doing what it is that you do right now?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Um, outside of outside the business, outside of Pinnacle, I'm first and foremost a dad to an awesome 7-year-old who consumes all of the spare time I have outside of my business. Um, and honestly, the business started not really anything that was planned. It's a family business. So out of school, I was doing remodeling, I was doing some real estate investing, some flipping. My family's background was in the wholesale building materials business, so very much related to the construction field. And my father and I ended up connecting back in 2005 um, with the idea of lending, not specifically having the strategy in mind because of the fact that I was involved with some real estate investing. We had stumbled upon some RIA groups like CT RIA, who is still in existence today, and that kind of turned us on to some opportunities out there in the space. We started very small, a couple loans, a couple people, and over the years, it's been almost 20 years now, have scaled the business into a fairly substantial lending operation. We service the entire state of Connecticut and Western Mass, and have the privilege of working with hundreds of really experienced, amazing real estate investors. Matt was one of the early people back, what was that, like 2010 maybe?
Yeah, I want to say it was about 2011, 2012 that we
Okay,
first
that
met.
sounds right. Yeah, so that was kind of in the beginning stages, the earlier years of Pinnacle. But honestly, since then, very little has changed other than our organization growing in terms of infrastructure. We've worked really hard to maintain that same kind of look and feel of, you know, customer service has always been the hallmark of our success, and the reputation that, like you said, we're there when you need us. We get things done quickly and easily, and it's a consistent product and offering that we're able to put out there to our borrowers.
Yeah, yeah. Which It's interesting too, because one of the other things that was always nice is like your team was really always very consistent. It was like I dealt with the same people all the time. Like inevitably, I ended up developing relationships with them that like we were super
Sure.
friendly and knew each other. Like I knew your attorney, I knew his kids' names. Like you ended up spending so much time with them, and they were always the same people who showed up the same way. So there was a level of comfort and trust that was built in all that.
Listen, yeah, I think like any business, this is no different. It's all about the relationships, right? And I've always had really high expectations for, the level of service that we're providing and the relationships that we're able to form. It's a competitive business. There's a lot of players in the space. It all comes down to having those really strong relationships. And whether it's me or my team members or my brother now, who has been involved for years and is actually a partner of mine in the business, it's maintaining that. And the attorneys, the insurance agents, everyone kind of works together as a team, and each borrower kind of has their own team around them, and we're really fortunate for a lot of people to be part of that as their lender. Yeah.
Love it. So let's start at the very basics. Talk to us about, let's just assume everybody on this call knows nothing at all about what hard money is, what its purpose is, what it looks like, how it functions. So let's just start at the very base level. Give
Sure.
us a rundown of what hard money is and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, so people come to a company like Pinnacle, a private lender, hard money lender, whatever you want to call it, for some pretty specific reasons outside of like, why wouldn't I go to a bank or, talk to a mortgage broker for a more conventional product? And there's a couple key reasons why private or hard money has always kind of had a place in real estate investing and will most likely always continue to have a place. What we're doing is providing short-term capital to real estate investors. And the benefit is, as you probably know, a lot of opportunities that come about within the real estate market are very time sensitive. And a lot of times you're going to get a deal or not get a deal based on how quickly you're able to move and close on that transaction. And hard money, private money is notoriously known for moving at a pace that can keep up with these types of opportunities. Where if you come to me and say, hey, Ian, I need to close this in a week, assuming the attorneys are able to complete their due diligence with title work, they're able to get insurance on the property, my team can move quickly enough to go through our underwriting process and have that ready to close. I think our record is 24 hours or a little under from when we were presented with an opportunity to when we were able to actually close on it. And that was kind of fixing another lender's kind of error on not being able to close in a timely manner.
Yeah.
So everything was already there. We just need to step in and do our work and get it done and bring it to the finish line. So speed is one of the most important components as to why private money or hard money is always going to have a place, for real estate investors. Banks aren't lenders that want to be involved with, uninhabitable, distressed property. That's not something that they typically are comfortable with or understand. So if there's no kitchens, there's no bathrooms, there's a hole in the roof, part of the house is burnt down. That's generally not something.
All things that we love.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's money, like the
It's
smell of cat
opportunity.
urine and,
Oh yeah.
disgusting things is
I
the
used,
smell of money but
yeah, I used to get people call me and say things like, "Oh, will you do a mold house?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? I draw hearts in the mold."
bring
Like,
it on. Yeah, exactly. And those are all things that, as we know, banks are terrified of and run from. Those
mhm.
are opportunities that we see every day, and that's just part of our business model. There are things most traditional lenders, they want long-term loans. They don't want to originate a loan and have it pay off in 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 months. To them, that's not a sustainable business model based on, their normal operations. For lenders like us, we encourage our loans to be paid off early. Our average loan duration is 6 months, and we love that because for us, we just continually churn our portfolio. That helps to further our revenue model, which makes us more profitable, and it really aligns us in a really great way with our borrowers because they want to get out of the property as quickly as possible. They want to get it renovated and either bring it to market for sale or go through and refinance us out if their strategy is to hold long term. So we are all on the same page as, get this project done quickly and easily. So the majority of the loans that we make are construction loans. So we're not only providing our borrowers with a percentage of acquisition funds to purchase the property, but most often the case is we're also providing them with funds to renovate the property as well. And that is extremely helpful because most of these projects need, in some cases, significant repairs. And they look to their hard money or private lender to support, those renovations.
So for you, and it's going to vary from lender to lender, but for you, what is your typical loan? What percent of acquisition, what percent of construction are you generally financing?
Yeah, so our program hasn't changed much since we last did business together. We're still funding, generally speaking, 80% of our borrowers' acquisition cost, and we can fund up to 100% of our borrowers' renovation budget. A big percentage that you need to keep in mind, or metric that you need to keep in mind, we're always going to cap our loans at 65% of the after repair value of the property. So we can loan up to 100% of the reno, but it's going to be capped at 65% of that ARV, or after repair value. That's something that will vary from lender to lender. We happen to be, I think, on the more conservative end of that, where some lenders these days are maybe up to 75% loan to ARV.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, there must be a lot of pressure in the market that we're in now for you to adjust that, just given.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. We've been doing this for longer than most in our space. And we have the benefit of these incredible relationships where most all of our business these days, over 90% of Pinnacle's business is all repeat. So all dealing with the same borrowers over and over. And, we're fortunate. They're very savvy, sophisticated, for the most part, real estate investors that are finding very good deals well below market. And honestly, for the most part, if you're not able to stick within that 65% loan to ARV, I'm not going to say it's a bad deal, but if you're talking about a fix and flip, there's not going to be as much room as maybe most would want to see for profit on that sale price. So most of our people, generally speaking, are pretty good at maintaining that, and it doesn't come to be an issue all that often. And when it does, it's just a matter of our borrower maybe having to put a little bit more cash into the deal to complete those repairs, which, is something that, generally speaking, is not a problem. Yeah. So we've been fortunate that we really have not had much pressure to have to look at adjusting that, which we're really not in a place that we would anyhow.
Got it. So we talked about why hard money. We talked a little bit about what percent of acquisition and construction. Talk to me about the cost of hard money. Again,
Sure.
It's going to vary from lender to lender, but generally, should folks expect to see? What's the window that is reasonable in that space?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think the answer is always going to depend on where you are in time with regards to where interest rates are. If you asked me that question 3 years ago, I would have said it'll range from like 1 to 3 points up front as far as origination fee, and maybe 7 to 12, 13% as far as interest only payments. Obviously, we've seen a significant increase in interest rates over the past several years, which has been a really interesting situation for us because of the fact that, unlike most companies, we're a privately owned fund. We have our own fund that we manage in-house, where most other lenders in our space are pretty much dependent on Wall Street to either sell their loans to, securitize. So they're going to always be varying depending on where the market is in terms of interest rates. Yeah. I have not changed rates probably since we worked together.
Well, I know you haven't, because I actually reached out to you, I don't know, maybe it was 6 months ago, maybe it was 9 months ago.
Yeah.
And it was because I was having a conversation with one of my agents, and I said, look, I haven't really paid much attention to hard money, the cost of hard money as of lately. That being said, rates are extremely high. So for those of you who don't know, what Ian's basically saying is the majority of hard money or private money, they're actually borrowing money, lending money, and then the delta in between is their margin. What does it cost them to borrow the money, and then what can they lend it out at? So obviously, if that's the case, as rates go up and down, their cost for the money goes up, and in turn, in order to maintain a margin, like their rates have to go up accordingly.
Exactly. And I mean, we still have a similar business model. We're just structured very differently. So it's allowed us to maintain that consistency. So obviously, when rates were very low, go back 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, we had some of our competition that was at, 1.8%, and we were at 3 points and 12%. And how did Pinnacle stay relevant, and how were we able to maintain our borrower base and stay competitive? It really comes down to the beginning of our conversation, the relationships that we have with our borrowers and our ability to move quicker, more efficiently, and more consistently than, virtually most of the competition within our space.
Yeah.
But fast forward to today, with rates being, not historically high, but very high for, where we are right now. Most lenders are going to be more comparable to where we are now, 2 to 3 points in terms of origination. And I've seen anywhere from, 10, 11% up to 13, 14%. And that's kind of where we're falling kind of right in the middle of where, rates are today, which has been very beneficial for us, because a lot of people that would want to have worked with us previously but maybe chose not to because there was such a big delta, are now much more willing to see what Pinnacle's all about.
Yeah. So one of the things that Ian said that I would stress is reliability and ease of borrowing are really, really important, especially when you're trying to scale at any level. Like at the end of the day, most of your opportunities in the short-term investing space are going to come from off market. You're going to have a seller that has a significant motivation that is usually time bound, right? And in order for you to get that deal, you've got to solve their problem and solve their problem in the time frame that they want it solved, right?
Sure.
So knowing that once I get a clear from a lender, I'm definitely going to be able to close that, and it's definitely going to close on time, matters a lot, right? Because that seller is relying on you to show up and do what you said you were going to do, and you're essentially relying on your lender to be able to show up and do what you're supposed to do. The other piece too is if you are shopping or looking at different hard money lenders, pay attention to the details. A lot of times you'll find, okay, their origination fees are lower or their interest is lower, but there's this fee that shows up every time you take a draw. There's another fee, right? There's an appraisal fee, and all of a sudden you put all that stuff in and you go, well, wait a minute. The cost isn't actually that different. It's just sliced and diced and packaged differently. In which case now I might not actually be saving the money that I think I'm saving. And oh, by the way, I'm dealing with a more complicated process that is slower and less reliable, right? So you do sometimes have to peel that onion to really see, what am I actually getting? What am I actually paying?
And that's a huge point. And I think a lot of people do miss that, because most of the larger lenders, they love to advertise their low rates. They do not like to disclose that you're going to get hit with the $700 appraisal fee. There'll be, a $1,000 underwriting fee on the HUD. Every draw you take, you're going to get hit for, $150, $250. And then, prepayment penalties, extension fees. That's where a lot of the companies generate the majority of their income, from all of the fees that a lot of times, unfortunately, are disclosed more towards the actual closing, when it's kind of too late to, kind of negotiate or, have other options. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yep. So let me ask you this. You've been doing this now 20-ish years, which is crazy. It's funny. Can I ask the question, Ian?
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to mind answering it. How old are you now?
40 years old.
40 years old. So Ian's only 5 years younger than me. He came onto the webinar. I haven't actually seen Ian in like 10 years. He gets on the webinar. I'm like, dude, did you get 10 years younger in the last 10 years?
I wish, man. Yeah, I wish, but no such luck.
It's
Yeah, I've
kind of
been doing this my entire adult life. And like I said, out of school, construction was what I got into and then kind of eased into this. So yeah,
yeah.
it's been quite the run.
So 20-year run, what's different, if anything, about that space today than what maybe it was when you first got in?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the biggest evolution that we've seen in terms of opportunities that are available to our borrowers um, is really probably most attributable to COVID, right? So what we saw for most of the beginning part of my career in real estate lending, most of the opportunities, well, it's attributable to the 2008 downturn and then to COVID after, where most of the opportunities that we saw coming from our borrowers were on market MLS bank-owned properties. I'd say the vast majority of projects that we were funding for a very long time were, mostly REO properties. There was always a mix of off-market opportunities, but that was the vast majority. So we were working very closely with a lot of the REO brokers throughout the state of Connecticut, who handled a lot of that inventory for banks. And what we saw change very quickly, probably about 4 years ago, was a shift in virtually no bank-owned inventory and pretty much all off-market inventory, where it's flip-flopped, where maybe if 70 or 80% of our business used to be coming from bank-owned acquisitions, is now 70 or 80% off-market. A lot of wholesalers who Matt and I were discussing earlier have pretty sophisticated operations where their whole business model is just locking up off-market opportunities for well below market value and then assigning the contracts to real estate investors. So they're making whatever fee on that spread while still providing buyers an opportunity to, make some money if they want to complete renovations and bring it to market.
Yeah.
I'd say that's probably one of the biggest changes that we've seen.
Yeah. So it's interesting because when I was doing this with you, I did 80 houses in 5 years, and I believe I bought four, maybe five homes out of MLS.
And you had a very different model because you were a franchisee of a company who basically required you to acquire off-market property, which that was very unique. And at that time, that wasn't the majority of the opportunities that we were seeing. But yeah, that's definitely it's been an interesting progression to see the different franchisees, and I've seen a lot of them over the years. And it's a challenging model, I think, but yeah, you're right. You were finding most off-market opportunities.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, the way I would always phrase it is like the MLS is like the stock pond that everybody goes to fish. Yet the biggest opportunities are upstream. Like if you can catch the fish before they make it to the pond, you have a better opportunity of getting a better opportunity, right?
Sure.
Like, because the minute it's in the pond, you're competing with everybody else, right? But
Hmm.
it wasn't that I didn't try to get properties out of MLS early, because early on I did, and occasionally I did. It was generally a unique situation. It might be an REO property that I made an offer on 5 times.
Hmm.
I made the offer, they declined it. I waited 2 weeks, submitted the exact same offer, they declined it. Or, some other unique situation where a property was undervalued and I was able to catch it quick and get in there and grab the opportunity. But the challenge I found is, and it's obviously exacerbated today, is if something showed up in MLS and it was a real opportunity, by the time I got there, there were 7 trucks outside and 7 people walking around with legal pads, right? And by the time I call the listing agent, it's way over asking and it's no longer a deal, right? Which we're dealing with now. Now, the flip side is it doesn't mean they don't exist. They're just harder to find because there's a lot of competition there and everybody's got their line in the water, right? So you're not only competing with investors, you're competing with your regular retail buyers also who are looking for opportunities. So obviously more competition becomes more challenging.
exactly. Yeah.
So talk to me about, we were talking a little bit before we got on the call, um, about some of the different strategies that you're financing. So not only just the buy, rehab, and resell, but you've got a lot of savvy investors that you're working with that are really diversified in their exit strategies and what it is they're looking at, what it is that they're doing. So can you share a little bit about what you're actually seeing in the market today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think some of our more successful real estate investors that we work with have business models which allow for taking advantage of different opportunities. So diversifying into some different areas where we're seeing more and more new construction. As existing home inventory has been more challenging to find, land opportunities have been presenting themselves with the ability to, put up a single family home or, a duplex. We've been seeing a lot of those and either bring them to market for sale or some of them are, holding them as long-term investments. And that's becoming a bigger segment of, what we're lending on these days. Buy and hold opportunities where borrowers are acquiring units, coming to us for quick closings, complete renovations, and then refinance us out, the BRRRR method, so that they can, continue that process and build units. And then obviously the flipping, a lot of single family, a lot of small multifamilies. And honestly, when some borrowers go into a property, they don't necessarily know what they're going to end up doing with it. I mean, in some cases, they're making a decision midway if they're going to put it on market for sale, or if they decide they want to take that refi option and hold long term. There's a lot of tax benefits. Instead of selling a property and getting hit with a significant tax liability, if you were to refinance that property, cash out, all cash out proceeds are tax free. So put some money back in your pocket, and then you have a cash flowing asset, which it's a great model. And I think, like I said, the most successful borrowers we work with have a healthy mix of different types of strategies that they're implementing depending on the project. We see some people that end up buying a piece of property that others might not see the value, where there might be a free building lot that they're able to split off, which can turn, a decent deal into a home run of a deal where you end up with a free building lot. We see quite a bit of those types of situations. So you're finding value where others might not be able to see it.
Yeah, it's funny. I visited a new construction unit last week. It was a 2,800 square foot, 3 bath, 4 bedroom, in a pretty blue collar town in Connecticut. Kind of builder grade construction, nice, but pretty standard. But the open house was not to market the sale of the property, it was to market a rental. So that builder basically was putting it on for 2 weeks. If they could rent it for X, they were going to hold it. And if they couldn't, they'd turn around and sell it. And it was interesting. I was looking at the lot as I was standing there on the back porch. It was a lot that probably 99% of people would have bypassed, right? It had water on it. Like at a glance, you could make the argument it had a slope, it had water on it. At a glance, you might look at that lot and say there's no value here, but this particular person knew enough, right? It cost them 15 grand in site work, but they bought the lot for almost nothing. And they turned what most would look at as probably not even a buildable lot into a great asset, right? Now, either A, they're going to turn around and sell it and they have a good, healthy margin, or B, they're going to hold it, take the cash flow, let it appreciate. In either case, they're in pretty good shape, right? So talk to me about so one of the common questions I get is what is a hard money lender looking for in a borrower? What matters? Is it their credit? Is it their experience? Is it their good looks? Like what do you actually take into account? I mean, for me, it had to be the good looks. I'm sure
I
that's
think hands down, yeah, definitely. That was it.
I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah. Honestly, it's really going to depend on the lender that you're talking to. We're maybe a little bit different than some other lenders as far as the qualifications that we look for. We have the benefit of having been in the business for a very long time with a lot of really strong relationships. So although we're always looking to bring on new borrowers, we may be somewhat more particular than some other lenders who are more aggressively looking to bring on new business. So the three main areas that we're evaluating are credit scores, experience, and liquidity. For us, we want to see that our borrowers have solid credit scores. Generally, 680 is a benchmark that we like to meet. We do have flexibility based on compensating factors, but a big part of that requirement is not only because obviously there's a lot to be said for credit worthiness as far as a borrower and repayment, but we want our borrowers to have options. And if refinancing needs to become one of those options during the course of one of our projects, the higher your FICO score, the better your credit, the more likely you will be able to get out of a loan into a more traditional mortgage, whether it be a DSCR loan or more conventional loan. So the credit score to us is important, and our borrower's average FICO score throughout the portfolio is really high compared to probably what most other lenders would require. A lot of lenders are more asset-based lenders in our space, less concerned about credit, more concerned about the collateral. They don't mind foreclosing on property if they have to. That's just not our business model. And we've been very fortunate, knock on wood, to not have had to do that for a very long time. So credit's the first piece that we're looking at. Experience, we generally want to work with individuals that have some sort of track record that we can look back to as far as, whether it's fix and flip, owning some, multifamily investment properties, something to give us some comfort that they have an understanding generally of what they're doing. And a lot of people will call me and say, well, hey, Ian, I don't have experience, but how are we ever going to get started with a lender if we don't have the experience to get started with you? And
That's kind of a chicken and egg situation.
yeah, and there's really two main responses that I have to that. I say partnerships can be a great way to get your foot in the door with a lender who wants to see a little bit of experience. If you have someone that can be on the loan with you, whether a borrower or guarantor, that can show a successful track record and wants to help you get started, you can kind of create whatever business relationship that makes sense in terms of a partnership. That's a great way. In other cases, it comes down to the liquidity and how much capital you have and what kind of compensating factors. I've had a lot of couples that come to me like husband and wife. One of them, the husband's a contractor, the wife's a realtor. They haven't actually done any flips, but they have all of the pieces in place. They have strong liquidity. For us, something like that is a pretty easy scenario to get comfortable with. So it's really case by case. We always try to figure out ways that we're able to either work together with someone or at least give them some guidance in terms of steps that they could take to potentially get themselves ready to work with a lender like ourselves. And then the last piece is the liquidity. So for anyone, whether you're a new real estate investor or seasoned, having adequate liquidity to work with a lender throughout the course of a project is essential. The last thing we want, the last thing our borrower wants, is to run into a situation where midway through the project, they've exhausted all of their resources. They're no longer able to move the project forward. Not good for anybody. So up front, we always like to do a check in terms of verifying that our borrowers have the necessary capital to work with us on any particular project that they're looking at. And the amount of capital available is all relative to the types of projects that they're looking at.
So we always used to call that the cash flow bug,
Mm,
getting bit by the cash flow bug. As I was
sure.
in that space and got to know a lot of people who were flipping at a really, really high level at big scale,
Right.
you find anyone who's been in the business long enough, every one of them at some point found themselves sitting on a lot of inventory with a lot of equity, i.e., a lot of profits. But suddenly they look up and go, oh, shoot, I don't have enough capital to get these things to the finish line. right? Because they just misjudged the overhead
Sure.
and kind of let their inventory get ahead of their capital. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, you have to look up and go, like I've got tons of opportunity here and tons of equity, but I don't have the capital to get it over the finish line. And in those scenarios, all of a sudden you got to start looking at other exit strategies to free up some of that capital. And it's like a learning process.
Equity rich cash poor can be a challenging situation to be in. And right, it might be you have to like fire sale a few properties just to generate some liquidity or try to, further leverage or whatever, the strategy to make sure that you can go through and complete these projects. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's important.
So you lend primarily in Connecticut, Western Mass. So for the folks who live in other areas, if they're going to get into this space and they want to go out and meet some lenders, right, get some resources to be able to go out and do these kinds of deals, what would be your advice? What do they look for? If I'm going to
Sure.
interview a lender, what are going to be the important things I should be looking for? Because it's important for everyone to know if you're having those kinds of conversations, that is a two-way street. They are deciding if you're a borrower that they want to work with, and you should be deciding if they're a lender that you want to work with.
Sure.
You should
Yeah.
go accordingly.
Yeah, I think in order to go about finding lenders you want to work with, always if you can find referrals from, fellow realtors or any other, brokers, whether it be mortgage or otherwise, to find someone that other people have worked with and have had success with, that's huge. Like local real estate meetup groups are always great networking opportunities to find that. But I think what's important questions to ask your lender is just figuring out how they're structured. When someone's working with a company like Pinnacle, you know that you're working with the owner, you're talking to the person that's making the decisions. When you're working with a larger, more national or larger regional lender who has a lot of young salespeople that are the ones that are originating, and they're very eager and aggressive to get your business, and they want to try to get you through to the finish line of a loan, but they have to deal with underwriting teams who have to deal with, the capital markets teams, because all of the loans that are originated through a lot of the larger lenders all need to fit in a very nice, neat box because all of these loans are going to be sold or securitized, which means the underwriting criteria, which can change pretty frequently depending on market conditions, it can be challenging. And that's why we see a lot of borrowers getting to a point where they think they're ready to close a transaction, come to find out that, there's some issues that they can't get past because it's a rural area or the percentage of, purchase to renovation, is not the way that it needs to be, or there's a host of different issues that can arise. So I think the most important thing is just knowing who you're dealing with in terms of how they're structured, how decisions are made is really important. I think probably the most critical as far as, being comfortable knowing who you're doing business with.
Yeah, to that point, I couldn't even tell you how many properties that I bought where I would go in and make an offer and they would share that somebody else made an offer significantly higher. In which case, my response would be if you have an offer for that number and they actually have the capital to close, you should take that deal. I don't know why they're paying that much, but it's significantly more than I could ever make sense of. So you should take the deal. The only thing I would say is if something goes sideways, call me. And then I bought a lot of properties after the fact when I got the phone call that deal was falling apart or they were trying to renegotiate it or whatever the case may be. And it was oftentimes because there was a lender issue, or maybe they didn't understand the math enough to know what the lender was and wasn't going to do. So they overpromised. But the point is, the minute they couldn't do what they said they were going to do, they lost trust with that seller. I had built trust by actually encouraging them to take an offer other than mine. And rather than trying to solve the problem with them, it would turn into a phone call to me. And I would have somebody like Ian who I knew I could call and say, hey, I got to do this deal, but I got to do it fast. Right. And he would show up and get the deal done for me. Okay. I think now's a good time to, well, actually, before we open it up for questions, and I'm catching you completely off guard with this. So if you got nothing, it's okay. But I feel like it's a fun question to ask. 20 years of doing this, you've seen a lot of stuff. What is your funniest or hairiest story from all the things you've seen in 20 years of finance and some really interesting deals?
I mean, there's a lot that come to mind. I mean, I think some of the craziest, most interesting have been some of the hoarder houses, maybe that we've come across. Where, not to go into too much detail, but it's amazing what you find in some of these houses. Where, I mean, it's just wild. I think those have probably been some of the most interesting situations that we've kind of come across. I'm sure, have you done any of those?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. You would have like, it was really common. You were walking into some, hairy situations, I'm going to call it, to try to be as respectful as I can.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
it was so common that they would meet you at the front door. Because again, most of these were off market. You were going to meet with a homeowner directly. A lot of times they'd meet you at the door and they'd be apologetic. Like, I'm going to apologize. I'm really embarrassed. It's this, it's that. And I would always say, there's nothing I haven't seen. Don't worry about it. I'm here to look at sticks and stones, not your stuff.
Sure.
And once in a while, you would walk into that house and you would be shocked. And I mean, I've had houses where I had to shuffle like this through the entire house. There was nothing but a path, floor to ceiling. They can't use the heat anymore because the baseboards are covered in stuff. They've got 22 unopened VCRs and no one's used the VCR in 15 years.
Yeah.
Some pretty wacky stuff.
Yeah. I think
one of the most interesting things I ran into, it wasn't a hoarder. But it was a small cape in Springfield, Mass. This is when I was still doing stuff on the side and selling full time. And we were finishing the second story. So the second story was unfinished when we bought it. We were turning it into like a master suite, the bathroom. But the long and short is there was like this little soft spot in the subfloor at the top of the stairs. And it was like every time I went up there, I would just step in that spot and it was kind of spongy. And I'm not a very big individual, like I'm pretty average size. So I'm like, every time I stepped on it, I'm like, man, that's spongy. Finally, one day I called the contractor and I said, hey, do me a favor while you're working up there. Will you just rip up that section on the top of the stairs and just put down some new ply? Like every time I step there, I can feel it kind of squishing. Like I don't want to see somebody go through the floor. I ended up getting a phone call. And he's like, you should probably swing by. So they pulled up the subfloor, and in between the joists was a sawed-off shotgun wrapped in newspaper with black tape wrapped around the handle. Now, I've watched enough crime TV to be like, okay, there's only a couple of reasons. One, you would hide a shotgun in a floor. There's only a couple of reasons you would wrap black tape around the handle of the shotgun. So he calls me. He's like, you got to come see this. I come, sure enough, there it is. And we're like, holy. So obviously we called the police. Police came and got it. I actually tried to follow up afterwards just because I was wicked curious. But they never told me if anything ever came of it. But it was a little bit of a surprise when that floor came up. Like,
Yeah.
There's a story behind that thing, and I don't know if I want to know what it is.
I don't.
And by the way, it was in like a very regular neighborhood. This wasn't like a super rough, super urban area. It was just like a very regular blue collar,
Unassuming. Yeah.
unassuming 1,200 square foot cape, like, which
Yeah.
just makes your mind go, what in God's name does this thing know that nobody else knows? Anyway, all right. So we're done with our fun stories. Let's open it up for some questions. We got about 12 minutes left. What do you want to know that we did not cover with respect to hard money funding, investment strategies that Ian might have some insight on based on all the people that he works with?
We have one in the chat, and Ian, from Marat. What is the ideal percent of renovation to price? Also, which price acquisition or acquisition on ARV or R? Sorry, I'm reading the. I
don't know if it's a terrible.
Marat fixed his typo, but like I'm reading it out loud.
So I think what the question is, what is an acceptable percentage of reno cost to acquisition cost? Because I did reference that as like a metric that some lenders who have very specific credit boxes don't want to see. I mean, they all vary and they can change, but I think I've heard, if the renovation budget is twice the purchase price, or there's all different types of metrics that I'm not really aware of in terms of how other lenders work it. For us, we're flexible in terms of if the deal makes sense, then it works. Like I've seen someone buy a property for $30,000, put $100,000 into it, and it's a $300,000 house. And there's some lenders that would probably not do that because those numbers to them are not proportional, and for whatever reason, that's not something that's within their credit box that works. For us, we're able to make decisions case by case. And for us, if we're comfortable with the borrower, if we're comfortable with the project, if the scope of work makes sense, if the ARV or after repair value supports it, then we're going to make it work because the deal works. I don't know that there's a specific percentage that you want to kind of go off of. It all depends on the project. I think it's case by case.
So Ian had mentioned earlier, the number that he does pay attention to is the total money in based on the ARV. So ARV being after repair value, you had shared the metric of 65%, meaning both acquisition and construction. As far as what he's lending does not exceed the 65% of after repair value, right? That obviously gives Ian some margin that, God forbid, something goes sideways and he is forced to do a foreclosure. He knows there's some protection, some cushion, and some equity there.
Exactly.
So that would probably be an example of, his own way of regulating to make sure the deal is safe and makes sense. I would add, I don't think the cost of construction compared to cost of acquisition is necessarily relevant for the same reason that Ian pointed out. Sometimes you're going to be buying something for almost nothing. I think the least amount I ever paid for a house was $12,500. I obviously had to put far more than $12,500 into the home to make it a livable and saleable home, right? So the two aren't really related. Yet, coming from the investor side of it rather than the lender side of it, the math that I always use and still stand by, even though it is harder in today's market, was my goal was 65 cents on the dollar minus repairs. Like that's the math that I was trying to buy at. And that's based off ARV also. So whatever the ARV was, I was typically paying 65 cents on the dollar minus repairs, which is pretty deep.
They're a great deal.
But they do exist. I would sometimes share that and people would go, well, how the hell do you buy houses for that number? They're out there. You just got to do the work to find them. Now, the side is what I'm seeing anyways, and Ian would probably know better than I do because he's more engaged today than I am in this space. I believe investors are pushing that number a little bit in today's market because values have gone up. So even though it might be a smaller margin, the dollars are the same or possibly even bigger. So my guess would be some buyers are pushing those metrics a little. But Ian made the point earlier, there's a lot of invisible costs included that when you try to close that window too small and you're going in with a hairline margin, the chances of that window closing on you are pretty good, right? Like I've run into a lot of people who say things like, as long as I can make 20, 25 grand, I'll do a deal. That's a really dangerous model. $25,000 on these kinds of investments is a very, very small margin. And depending on the property and the scope of work, that window can close really fast on you. If it takes you a little bit longer, the work is a little bit more expensive, little things will add up and that window can close on you pretty quickly, especially if you don't understand the math and you don't really know what the overhead is. You're not thinking about your interest-only payments, your taxes, your insurance, your utilities in the dead of winter, all of these things that start to nibble away at that. So what I would encourage you is have a clear model that takes all of that into account. 65 cents on the dollar minus repairs always worked really well for me. Depending on where you are, you might be able to adjust that a little bit. Yeah, you need more margin than you really think you need going into these deals.
Okay,
Well
so a
said.
follow-up question that I have then. Thank you so much, Matt. That was very helpful, actually. And Ian, do you think 75% is too high,
do you think?
75%,
generally speaking?
75% loan to after repair value? What are we?
Right. No, no, not 75. 75% cost, overall cost to ARV. When I try to acquisition cost, I'm sorry.
75% acquisition cost to ARV.
Right.
And are you including repairs? Where are the repairs in that equation?
They're not included. So obviously it's going to depend on price. But Matt, you mentioned you look for 65% on acquisition cost, on the dollar, or 65 cents on the dollar.
So the important metric that's being left out. So my math was always 65 cents on the dollar minus repairs. So simple math, if the house was going to be worth 100 grand done, turnkey, ready to sell, I'm going to pay 65 grand for that if it's turnkey today.
Including repairs.
However, if it's going to cost me 30 grand to get it, instead of addition, I'm now going to subtract that 30 and I'm paying 35 grand for the house. So it's 65 cents on the dollar minus repairs. So my response would be, if you're buying the property for 75% of ARV and you're not subtracting out construction, then yes, you're paying too much. You're going to end up with a break even or a loss, depending on the scope of work that has to be done. So you got to figure out what your margin is, and then you have to subtract your cost of sale. And personally, I think no matter what market you're in, if you have a higher price point, you can have the same margin as, let's say the average sales price where I am, and let's say it's 300, and where you are, it's 600. Well, if I have a 15% profit margin all said and done, like legit profit, and you do, like your number is bigger than mine, even though it's the same percentage, because it's 15% of a bigger number. However, I believe that's where people get into trouble, is they start looking at the deal rather than looking at it as a percent of ARV minus repairs. They're just looking at it as long as I make X, I'm happy. I think that's a dangerous strategy long term. And where I think people find themselves in a lot of trouble is they might start flipping in a really good market where the market fixes their mistakes. So you kind of get away with it, right? Because maybe your math was wrong and maybe it takes you a little bit of extra time to get it done. But in the meantime, like the market's really competitive, things are appreciating. You make mistakes, but the market covers up your mistakes.
I think that's what happened to me.
Yeah. Then all of a sudden the market shifts and that math matters even more. And next thing you know, what you thought was a stable strategy goes sideways on you and you find yourself upside down on a property. The reality is the strategy was flawed from day one. It's just the market was fixing your mistakes, right? And the real hard part is if you start in a market that does fix mistakes and that market lasts for a bit, you're going to get really confident that what you're doing is smart. When it's actually not, it's the market fixing your model. And then when it shifts, like you're lost and you don't understand how to adjust, how to pivot, and how to fix the problem. So I think it's really important, regardless of the market you're in. Like I always used to say, like people would ask me often, like, isn't it risky doing what you do? And I would say, from my perspective, I don't think it is. I think it's math. And as long as you follow the math, you'll be okay. Right? Your worst case scenario, even if you make a mistake, you should make less money, but you shouldn't lose money. Right? But it's a little bit like being a professional gambler. Like, and maybe that's not a great example, but professional gamblers, they have rules that they follow and they have knowledge and experience. And there's a lot more going on than just guessing.
Calculated risk.
It's calculated risk. Exactly. So you got to have your model. Your model's got to be solid and you got to follow that model regardless. There should be very little flexibility in whatever your buy box is, right? Like, of course, within reason. If you make an offer on a property and they want you to come up a couple grand and you have plenty of margin, sure, you might adjust a hair. But when you make those big adjustments, you usually learn the universe will slap you. And it'll
And
make
honestly, working with a good lender can serve as another set of eyes
100%.
and help as a guide to, listen, we work with a lot of experienced real estate investors, some not as, and everyone will at times come to us and they might miss something on the renovation that we do, walk through and go through what we perceive the budget to be, or maybe the way they're looking at comps isn't exactly right based on the accuracy of how they're looking at it. And we can sometimes, we won't tell people that it's a bad deal, don't do it, but maybe, this is what we're seeing, and we feel like you should kind of, reevaluate the loan and or the deal. And a lot of people will at that point say that they'll go back to the seller and try to renegotiate, or maybe it's just not the right opportunity. So that's another, I think, great aspect of having a good lender, that you have a good relationship that can help you in terms of maybe sometimes dodging some bullets or finding some potential issues that you may not have seen previously.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times if you're chasing a deal and you haven't done a lot of deals, or you don't have a consistent flow of opportunity, it's kind of human nature that it's easy to start putting on rose-colored glasses, right? You start squeezing the construction budget a little, you start pushing the ARV up a little because you're kind of emotionally attached to the outcome. You bring in a third party like an Ian, who he's not emotionally attached to the deal. He's going to see it for what it is. Having those people, whether it's your realtor who's in the deal with you, your contractor who's in the deal with you, your lender who's in the deal with you, they can give you an outside perspective that a mentor can be really important, right? I've saved a lot of people from doing bad deals over the years. And I would always say you can't lose money on the deal you didn't do. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow. But when you start getting emotionally attached to the outcome and you start pushing the numbers, you put yourself in a position where you can lose real money. Right. And that goes back to like Warren Buffett, right? Rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, don't lose money. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Any other
Very
questions
helpful.
for Ian before we thank him for his time, his wisdom, and let him go?
There's 2 real quick in the chat. I'm going to put his info in there as well, and we'll send out the recording and Ian's contact info for anyone that has to jump. But do we need a pre-approval letter for putting an offer on MLS properties, and do you require an appraisal before lending?
2 great questions. 2 quick answers. So when we approve borrowers to do business with Pinnacle, we do provide them with instructions to generate pre-approval letters right from our website, which is a great feature because it gives you 24/7 access to pre-approval letters, which allows for entering a specific property address, specific amount that you want to show that you're approved for. And whether it's an off-market or on-market transaction, those letters can be very helpful. It shows whoever the seller is that you have a lender that's behind you to support it. As far as what was the second question?
Appraisal.
Oh yeah, so we have in-house team members that do our walkthroughs for us. We don't use third-party appraisers. So there is a big difference there because we're not waiting on scheduling an appraiser that could take, a week or 2 or 3, which isn't uncommon. It's one of our team members. It's going to take the borrower's budget, run through the property in 10 minutes, and just determine that the scope of work looks good, the budget matches up with the scope of work, and then making sure that the ARV is in line with those items.
Which, by the way, I would argue if you're talking to a potential lender, asking them what their appraisal process is really important, because if they are using a third party, that's just one more opportunity for things to go sideways. It's one more person who may or may not be used to looking at properties like that, and they could make a decision that could send the deal sideways on you.
Sure.
Yes, we have Cassie. You said there's one more.
Last one. What are the areas that you cover again, Ian?
So Pinnacle covers the entire state of Connecticut and Western Massachusetts market.
Perfect. Thank you. That's it.
All right, sir. On that note, it was good to see you again. I got to give you a call, and you and I got to grab lunch or something because it's been too long.
I look forward to it. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Have a
Appreciate
good
you.
one, everybody.
Yeah.
Be well.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye, everyone.